The gun was already pointed at his head before he even turned off the engine, and for a split second the world didn't feel real anymore. It felt like one of those moments where everything slows down but your mind races faster than ever, trying to understand how a normal drive home just turned into something that looked like the end of everything. Don't move. The voice was so loud, so sharp, it cut straight through him. His hands shot up instantly, fingers spread wide, heart pounding hard against his chest. Red and blue lights flooded the inside of his car, bouncing off the glass, turning his reflection into something distorted, something almost unrecognizable. I said, keep your hands where I can see them. Another officer rushed in, flashlight blasting straight into his eyes. He couldn't even see their faces properly, just silhouettes, weapons, and tension. The door was yanked open, and before he could even speak, before he could explain anything, his arm was grabbed and he was pulled out hard. His body slammed against the car. Pain shot through his shoulder, but he didn't resist. He knew better. Please, just, he started, but the words didn't matter. They never did in moments like this. What did I do? He asked, trying to keep his voice steady even though everything inside him was tightening. You know exactly what you did, one officer snapped, forcing his hands behind his back. No, he didn't. And the fact that nobody was explaining anything made it worse, because this wasn't about something he did. It was about something they already believed. On your knees. The command came again, louder this time, and he slowly lowered himself down onto the cold asphalt. The rough surface pressed into his knees, but he didn't react. His focus was on staying calm, staying controlled, staying alive. Cold metal cuffs snapped around his wrists, too tight, always too tight. A small crowd had already started forming. Cars slowed down, people pulled out their phones, recording like this was entertainment, like this was just another scene they'd scroll past later. To them, he looked like a criminal. To them, the story was already written. Search the car, one officer said. Another officer leaned in, going through everything quickly, aggressively, like he was trying to prove something, and then a phone rang. Loud, sharp, persistent. The officer inside the car glanced at it, then paused. His entire posture changed. Sir, he called out, his voice suddenly unsure. You need to see this. What? The officer holding him asked. The second officer stepped out slowly, holding the phone like it suddenly meant something more. It's the hospital. Nobody reacted at first. Then he turned the screen. Incoming call. St. Mark's emergency urgent. The man on his knees closed his eyes for a brief second, like he already knew what was happening, like time had just run out. You should answer that, he said quietly. Why? The officer snapped. Before he could reply, the phone rang again, and again, relentless. Finally, the officer answered. What? He said bluntly. The voice on the other end was panicked, fast, desperate. Where is he? We've been calling non-stop. The chief is in critical condition. Do you understand me? He's crashing. We need Dr. Carter now. Silence. Heavy, crushing silence. The officer slowly turned his head toward the man in cuffs. Dr. Carter? He asked. The man looked up, calm despite everything. Yes, he said. I'm the one you just put on the ground. Everything shifted. Not gradually. Instantly. The same hands that had forced him down now loosened. The same eyes that saw him as a threat now searched his face like they were trying to understand what they had just done. Take the cuffs off, another officer shouted. The metal clicked open, but it didn't undo what had already happened. It never does. Sir, we didn't know. Dr. Carter stood up slowly, rubbing his wrists for just a second before stepping toward his car. You didn't ask, he said, his voice calm but sharp enough to cut deeper than anger ever could. Nobody had a response, because there wasn't one. Within seconds, they were escorting him back into his car. Sirens flipping from accusation to urgency, clearing traffic instead of creating fear. The drive to the hospital felt different now. Faster, heavier, every second mattered, and he knew it. His mind shifted completely, pushing everything that just happened to the side, because right now, someone's life depended on him. When he arrived, the hospital was already in chaos. Nurses rushing, doctors shouting, machines beeping in rapid, uneven rhythms. He's here, someone yelled as soon as Dr. Carter stepped through the doors. No time for explanations. No time for anything except action. What's the status? He asked while walking quickly toward the operating room. Massive cardiac trauma, internal bleeding, pressure dropping fast. A nurse responded. Dr. Cartner nodded once. Prep the OR. We go in now. Inside the operating room, everything became focused, controlled, precise. The chaos outside didn't exist anymore. The humiliation, the anger, the flashing lights, all of it faded into the background. Here, he was in control. Here, he was exactly who he said he was. The surgery was intense, hours passed like minutes, but every second was critical. His hands moved with perfect precision, steady, confident, experienced. The room was silent except for the machines and his voice giving instructions. Clamp, suction, stay with me. Outside the operating room, officers filled the hallway. The same department that had just thrown him to the ground was now waiting for him to save their leader. Among them stood the officer who had pulled him over. He couldn't sit, couldn't stand still. His mind replayed everything over and over again. The gun, the shouting, the cuffs, the assumptions. I didn't even look at his ID, he muttered to himself. Another officer shook his head slowly. We saw what we wanted to see. Time dragged. Every minute felt like a judgment. Finally, the doors opened. Dr. Carter stepped out, removing his gloves slowly, his face calm but tired. The entire hallway went silent. He's stable, Dr. Carter said. Relief hit instantly. Officers exhaled, tension breaking all at once. The chief was going to live because of the man they had just treated like a criminal. The officer stepped forward, his voice heavy. Doctor, I don't even know what to say. Dr. Carter looked at him, not with anger, not with pride, but with something deeper, understanding. You don't need to say anything, he replied, but you do need to remember this. The officer swallowed hard. Dr. Carter continued, his voice steady. Tonight, you didn't see a doctor, you didn't see a person coming from saving lives. You saw a threat before you saw anything else. Nobody spoke, because every word was true. And next time, Dr. Carter added quietly, it might not be someone like me. The weight of that sentence settled over everyone, because next time, there might not be a second chance. The officer nodded slowly, the lesson hitting deeper than any punishment. I understand, he said. Dr. Carter held his gaze for a moment, then turned and walked away, his steps calm, his posture steady, like nothing had happened. But something had, not just for him, for everyone who witnessed it, because that night wasn't just about saving a life. It was about exposing something far more dangerous than any crime. A moment where assumptions almost cost everything. And a truth that nobody in that hallway would ever forget. Dr. Cartner walked down the long hospital corridor, the sound of his footsteps soft against the polished floor. But inside his mind everything was loud, louder than the sirens, louder than the shouting, louder than the moment a gun had been pointed at his head just hours ago. He kept his face calm, his posture composed, but the weight of what had happened hadn't disappeared. It had just moved deeper, settling somewhere harder to reach but impossible to ignore. He pushed open the locker room door and finally allowed himself a moment alone. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above him as he leaned against the wall, closing his eyes for a second longer than usual. His hands, the same hands that had just saved a life, still carried the memory of cold metal digging into his wrists. He slowly flexed his fingers, as if trying to shake off that feeling, but it didn't go away so easily. A knock broke the silence. Dr. Cotto, a nurse's voice came from the other side. He straightened up instantly. Yep, you're needed in recovery. The chief's awake. For a brief second, he hesitated. Not because he wasn't ready, but because he knew this moment carried more than just medical responsibility now. It carried everything that had happened before that operating room door closed. I'm coming, he said. When he entered the recovery room, the atmosphere was quieter, controlled, but still heavy with emotion. Machines beeped steadily, monitors glowing softly in the dim light. The chief lay in the bed, pale but conscious, his eyes slowly adjusting as he turned his head toward the door. But him? The chief asked weakly. One of the officers standing nearby nodded. Yes, sir. That's Dr. Carter. The room shifted slightly as everyone stepped back, giving space, but also watching closely. Like they understood this wasn't just another doctor-patient interaction. Dr. Carter approached calmly. How are you feeling? The chief let out a slow breath. Like I lost a fight I didn't know I was in, he said, attempting a faint smile. Dr. Carter nodded. You're lucky. It was close. The chief studied him for a moment, his expression slowly changing as something else settled in. They told me what happened, he said quietly. Silence followed. Not uncomfortable, but real. Dr. Carter didn't respond immediately. He simply checked the monitor, adjusted something small, keeping his focus where it needed to be. That shouldn't have happened, the chief continued, his voice gaining a little strength. Not to you. Not to anyone. Dr. Carter finally looked at him. But he said calmly. The simplicity of that answer carried more weight than any long explanation ever could. The chief swallowed, clearly processing that truth. I've spent my whole career thinking I understood what my officers do out there, he said slowly. Tonight, I realize there's a lot I don't see. Dr. Carter didn't interrupt. Those men out there, the chief continued, glancing toward the door where officers stood quietly. They respect me. They follow my orders. And if they can make a mistake like that with you, then I need to ask myself how many times something like this has happened without me ever knowing. The room felt heavier again, not with tension, but with realization. Dr. Carter crossed his arms lightly, his tone still steady. It's not just about one mistake, he said. It's about patterns, assumptions, moments where people don't stop to think because they believe they already know the answer. The chief nodded slowly, each word sinking in deeper. I owe you more than a thank you, he said. You saved my life tonight. Dr. Carter held his gaze. That's my job. And what they did? The chief asked. Dr. Carter paused for a moment, choosing his words carefully. That's theirs, he said. No anger, no raised voice, just truth. The chief leaned back slightly, exhaling. It won't be ignored, he said firmly. I promise you that. Dr. Carter gave a small nod, not as acceptance, but as acknowledgement. He had heard promises before. What mattered was what came after. I hope so, he replied. As he turned to leave, the chief spoke again. Dr. Carter stopped. I'm glad it was you they called tonight, the chief said. Dr. Carter looked back briefly. Me too, he said quietly. Because if it hadn't been him, if it had been someone else in that same position, someone without a title that forced people to reconsider, someone without a role that demanded respect, then the ending might have been very different. And that was the part nobody in that room could ignore anymore. Outside, the officer who had made the stop was still there, waiting, not because he had to be, but because he couldn't leave without facing it properly. When Dr. Carter stepped into the hallway, their eyes met instantly. I've been waiting, the officer said. I figured, Dr. Carter replied. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then the officer took a step forward. I keep replaying it, he admitted. Everything I said, everything I did. And the worst part is, it felt normal at the time. Dr. Carter studied him for a second. That's exactly why it matters, he said. The officer nodded, his jaw tightening slightly. I was trained to react fast, to assume risk, to control the situation. And that's important, Dr. Carter said. But control without awareness turns into something else. The officer exhaled slowly. I saw your skin before I saw anything else, he admitted. Before your clothes, before your words, before your ID. And I hate that that's true. There it was, honesty, raw and uncomfortable. Dr. Carter didn't look away. Recognizing it is the first step, he said. But it doesn't fix what I did, the officer replied. No, Dr. Carter said. It doesn't. The words landed hard. But it can change what you do next, Dr. Carter added. The officer looked up, holding on to that. I will, he said. I swear I will. Dr. Carter nodded once. Then make sure tonight means something. The officer straightened slightly, not out of authority, but out of purpose. It already does, he said. Dr. Carter gave a small, almost invisible nod, then turned and walked away, leaving behind a moment that had shifted more than just one perspective. Because that night wasn't just about a mistake. It was about what happens after the mistake, about whether people choose to ignore it or learn from it. And as the hospital slowly returned to its normal rhythm, one thing was certain. Nobody who witnessed that night would ever see things the same way again.